Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar sponsored by Grace Technologies. My name's Terry Becker. I'll be presenting to you today. So NFPA 70 2024 edition, and again, the draft CSA Z462 2024 edition changes and updates webinar. So really, again, looking forward to sharing my experience and knowledge in my electrical safety journey with respect to these two standards. So if you're not familiar with me, I am based out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, 32 years experience in electrical engineering. I am an NFPA certified electrical safety compliance professional, an IEEE senior member, and that was awarded to me in my work in electrical safety. My background is oil and gas, electrical related engineering, based out of Calgary. But I left that industry and became an independent electrical safety consultant back in 2007. So my electrical safety journey has been 16 years now. So again, that's a lot of background experience that I do share. And when I get into these webinars, I can embellish on some of that information that I've learned along the way. So I am a founding member and a voting member of the CSA Z462 Tech Committee and the first past vice chair. I'm also the working group leader for Clause 4.1, which would be Article 105, 110 in the NFPA 70E, and I'm also the annexes working group leader for Z462. I'm a founding member and a voting member of CSA Z463, Maintenance of Electrical Systems Standard, which is our equivalent in Canada of NFPA 70B. And I'm also a voting member on the IEEE 1584 Guide for Arc Flash Hazard Calculation Standard, and also worked on the IEEE 1584.1 subcommittee, which we updated to reflect the 2018 edition changes of 1584. So again, 16 years specifically related to electrical safety consulting. And that is the core of what I do provide. And actually right now I am working with Grace Technologies and supporting their expert network. So I help companies build electrical safety programs. First of all, interpret OSHA regulations or OHS regulations and the application of 70 and Z462, and then develop programs, provide external electrical safety audits, provide arc flash and shock training. And I have presented at over 75 conferences and workshops in Canada, the US, Australia, Italy, and India on electrical safety, CSA Z462 and 70E. So acknowledgement of Grace Technologies as a leader in electrical safety device manufacturer and all of their supporting products and services, and specifically their expert network, which I am very glad to be participating in with Grace. So my background again, you can find out more about me on my website or my LinkedIn page. I also write articles in Canada for Electrical Line magazine. I've been writing for Kevin Burr, for the editor, for probably over on and off actually for a decade. So there's a wealth of knowledge in these articles that are available on electricalline.com and on my website. So standard disclaimers for these types of webinars. I'm not going to quote all of this, but again, these disclaimers are provided to ensure you that the information you're hearing is my interpretation and my company's interpretation and provision of this information. You'd have to consult NFPA directly for any specific interpretation on the 2024 edition, and you're advised to consult the CSA group and the published 2024 edition of Z462, which will not publish till March 2024 now. All right, it says expected January, but it's already been delayed. I'm also noting that I do have CSA group copyright permission for using CSA materials in this webinar presentation. And again, not all potential changes will be reviewed. I just don't have enough time. So information on the changes, again, can be reviewed in a hard copy or via the NFPA link of 70E. The concern there is, again, interpretation. So you're going to hear some interpretation from me today that will potentially conflict with others, or they may not have the background information that I have that I'll present today. You can purchase a hard copy of NFPA 70E, and you can access a free online version at the indicated websites. The draft CSA Z462 public review closed July 31st. We're on a different time cycle than NFPA, so it's no longer available. And again, the published date actually just changed in the last week from January to March 2024. I promote a continuous improvement model aligned with occupational health and safety management system standards. So part of that is providing these webinars and giving, again, information to industry and interpreting electrical hazard identification and the specific application of NFPA 70E, CSA Z462, and other applicable standards, again, to electric shock and arc flash hazards. What you see on the screen is both a USA and a Canada due diligence framework for electrical safety. This is unfortunately what an employer needs to ensure they do with respect to electric shock and arc flash hazards. And at the bottom right, it says electrical safety program, which is a mandatory requirement of 70E. And then I've got what I call the electrical safety trifecta of standards on the bottom right. Today we're talking about NFPA 70E, but obviously there's a relationship between NFPA 70, 70E, and 70B, and more specifically with the latest edition of 70B just published. It has a definite electrical safety requirement related to maintenance. Same due diligence framework for Canada, obviously OH&S regulations versus OSHA, and different standards, but we have the same trifecta. The agenda, again, Terry's going to take some time, and that's the challenge, to go through some of this information. So introduction, just some background to 70E and the NFPA process, introduce Z462 for, again, USA attendees or international attendees that are not aware of what we have done in Canada with respect to adopting 70E, but making our own version of it. Interpretation and application, technical harmonization between the two standards, then specifically a summary of some of the changes to the 70 2024 edition and updates, and then the draft CSA Z462 2024 expected changes and updates. Just some background at the end about arc flash PPE and arc flash and shock equipment labeling, and some specific concerns and issues I have there. Conclusion, and then some questions as we discussed. So historically, Z462 has been technically harmonized with 70E. For the 2024 editions, we will have significant technical divergence in Canada with Z462. And again, the public review draft and does include, I think, most of the changes from NFPA 70 2024. We did adopt them, but we have our own changes independently of 70E that were not adopted into 70E. I do encourage, and I hope, again, that everybody attending from the US or internationally that may be a 70 user, that you consider some of the things I'm going to present today on Z462 that you should actually adopt into your electrical safety program. So public may not be aware of the process involved or in general, but 70 first published in 1979. It had a different name originally. In 2004, the name was changed to its current name. 1584, published in 2002, was updated and published in second edition in 2018. Again, the 2024 edition of 70 published early this cycle, the first time since my involvement. I've attended all NFPA 70 Tech Committee meetings since 2007 in San Diego, and this is the first time 70 published early, and the reason is there was no, well, that the changes weren't significant, which then demanded that no one had any issues. So there was no notice of intent to make a motion to reject any of the changes. So because of that, NFPA published it on May 13, 2023. Usually there are NITMAMs, and therefore is a delay in publishing. So that's why it published early if you were not aware. This is just a graphic of the process in NFPA 70 for standards development. Again, the notice of intent to make a motion is the last item that needs to occur. There was no notices, no NITMAMs this cycle, so it published early. This cycle, there were, again, another significant amount of public inputs, 357. The first revisions were 166, second revisions 168, 73 second revisions. The good news is 70 2024 doesn't include substantial technical changes. Significant changes, in my opinion, were related to electrical hazard classification, Chapter 1, Article 100 definitions, and Chapter 3, which were submitted by the US DOE. And again, US DOE has been a major contributor to electrical hazard classification research, and in turn submitting and getting that information accepted into 70E and into Z462, and that's through appropriate channels of publishing, IEEE papers, providing industry tutorials, and publicly sharing their information with their experts. And I've had the benefit of meeting many of the individuals from the US DOE and regard them as a as again a hub of electrical hazard classification, and thankfully that's occurring in the US, and that information is being shared with industry. So back to the relationship between Z462 and 70E. Well, that's part of my journey. Back in 05, I found out about 70E and said, oh, arc flash, this is something new, and became aware that within the large oil and gas company I was working for, we probably had, I don't know, 3,000 workers exposed to arc flash, and 10,000 plus exposed to electric shock. So it was a significant risk. So what happened? There was some convergence at the time, and CSA signed an MOU with NFPA, and we adopted 70E in Canada as CSA Z462 Workplace Electrical Safety Standard. So we first published officially, it was January 2009. We have 5 editions. So we did start to diverge a little bit, probably in the second edition with some annex changes. And there's some annexes in Z462 that are not in 70E. So again, I encourage 70 users to get a copy of both and use the information that's in both with respect to, again, electrical hazard identification and your electrical safety programs and the related content of that program, and specifically when you complete your qualitative risk assessment procedure. So again, now what's happening in 2024, though, we're taking some significant technical divergence, anticipated that it will occur in Z462. So the process for amendments in Canada is slightly different than the US. There's just a form that you submit. The tech committee, we also have what we call dockets submitted by tech committee in Canada. And unfortunately, we have not had good public engagement basically at all. And that's unfortunate, because I try and communicate to Canadians and people in the States that want to influence Z462. You can submit amendments for change to Z462. So please do so. Again, and then the Z462 Tech Committee, we review all of the changes to 70, and we may or may not accept them as well. And in turn, the 70 Tech Committee does the same when we submit changes we're making to Z462, which is really what's occurred. The changes we made to Z462 were not accepted into 70E, but some of them are good and some of them are bad with respect to the changes. And I try and do what I can as a voting member in Z462 to temper some of the things that I don't agree with that get changed, unfortunately. All right, so these standards are not adopted into law in any jurisdiction in Canada or OSHA in the US, FYI. They're industry accepted best practices. Benchmarking is a good tool. So I'll tell you that basically all industry sectors are using 70E in the US. It's being used globally as well. And in Canada, all industry sectors have voluntarily accepted CSA Z462. Due diligence approach for application, interpretation is important. So you're getting some interpretation today. Companies need to have a policy, and elimination is a priority. Employer-employee responsibilities, establish an electrically safe work condition, justification for energized electrical work. What is missed, in my opinion, is this requirement for a mandatory electrical safety program to be developed, implemented, and audited. Right, and within that program, it should consider some information listed in 70 and Z462, but above and beyond that, the electrical safety program has to align with occupational health and safety management system standards. So we need to address safe installations, electrical equipment maintenance. The employer should complete an overarching risk assessment procedure separate from the arc flash and shock risk assessments completed by the qualified person to get boundaries and arc flash and shock PP tools and equipment. The risk assessment should include human performance and human error. There's lots of good information in Annex F of both 70E and Z462. We have to consider normal operating or equipment conditions. The other thing that I find that is missed is an energized electrical job safety planning form shall be documented, completed by the qualified person. And what we're doing with that, or they're doing with that form, is they're validating their personal residual risk level, and then it's as low as reasonably practical. And there's an example of a job safety planning form on the screen. We need to address emergency response, emergency release of an electrically shocked worker, audit, incident reporting. So again, I'm just summarizing really what's in chapter 1 in 70E and clause 4 in Z462. It's just a precursor to, again, the changes that are coming. All right, so arc flash and shock risk assessment is completed. And we have to have appropriate arc flash and shock PP tools and equipment. Lots of changes there in the last 5 years. And then maintenance requirements need to be addressed as an element of risk. And FYI 70B 2023 published in April. We are updating Z463, and we'll have an updated revision of it in 2024. So special equipment and annexes, and special equipment is where the DOE did provide a lot of electrical hazard classification information in the 2024 edition of 70E. Ultimately, we want this hierarchy of risk controls to be implemented in the field, again, for when the worker is exposed to arc flash and shock, to, again, eliminate as a priority. But if we can't, make sure their residual risk is as low as reasonably practical. Just a visual tool of how we've tracked 70E. Again, over the years, initially, 70E really focused on get PP on the worker. It didn't have the overarching risk assessment procedure that was added in 015, and the standard is 100% risk assessment based, both Z462 and 70E. Now, moving into the 70-2024 editions, so some global changes. The word shock has been changed to electric shock, which I sponsor. I think that's good, and that's clarity. As far as rubber insulating gloves and leather protectors, it's now going to just say protectors. There's been some changes in the protector glove that could be put over top of a rubber insulating glove. So there's some evolution in glove technology, as well as an evolution in separate arc flash rated gloves that are out there. So just manage what's changing out there and make sure that you're aware of the limitations of some of this PP as it changes. Quite often, NFPA makes many style manual changes for their standards, so that occurred in this edition in a significant manner. The style manual required a scope at the beginning of all the articles, so scope had to be added, and that involved some restructuring of some of the articles that occurred due to the scope addition. And as at the bottom of the slide, I mentioned already that the US DOE public comments are, in my opinion, some of the most significant changes and beneficial changes to 70E and Z462. And that's something that's been evolving over the years as the DOE has been submitting public comments and the body of knowledge on electrical hazard classification. They have presented tutorials at the IEEE Electrical Safety Workshop, which I have been attending since 2006. And I also have presented and exhibited at conference over the years as well. So what you see on the screen is quite busy. It's an electrical hazard classification chart. And the next slide is a little more clear on how they've broken down a review of the electrical hazards. The capacitor content included in the 2021 edition of 70E, which we didn't have in Z462, but probably will in the 2024 edition, came from DOE research. All right, so they've broken down electrical hazard classification, and as you can see, to 50, 60 hertz power, DC capacitors, batteries, RF, sub-RF, inductors, and photovoltaic cells. So again, this body of knowledge, it's actually information that can be obtained. It's publicly available. It's not copyright protected because the DOE is a federal organization. So if you want more information on the background of these charts, get in touch with me offline, and I'll gladly share some of the information from the DOE, from the tutorials I've attended. Again, this is good information, and part of an employer's electrical safety program should be to maintain and stay up to date as you are today attending on what is going on out there, and it's a splinter effect of things that are changing. This is really important. So again, that's been updated in 70E. I've deciphered some of that, and I'll be sharing this table with everyone attending, and broken it down into an electrical hazard classification table. So you'll receive some information post-webinar. Some of the information I'll present, some of it may not be presented, and it's free to you to use, and it can stimulate questions after the webinar, and please get back in touch with me. So in Chapter 1, Article 100 definitions, and the draft Z462 Clause 3, we've accepted most of these definitions, probably all of them, but we're going to present them differently. And it's really important that you note this syntax presentation of the definition. So definitions were extracted from Chapter 3 and moved into, again, Article 100. And to keep things clear, some of those definitions only apply to specific electrical equipment. So you're going to see this new bracket behind a definition. And this is important with respect to, in this case, capacitors, because there's two new boundaries for capacitors that only apply to capacitors, and the definitions therefore only apply to capacitors. So pay attention to this change, that if a definition's in brackets, it only applies to that chapter and article. All right, so definitions, Chapter 3, Article 310, 320, 330, 340, 350, and 360 have been extracted and moved forward. And that involves, I think, well over 40 definitions. And you can see the syntax where I've included in the brackets the article, right? So again, I think it's at least 40 definitions moved. from Chapter 3 into, again, Article 100. All right, and then that syntax is really important, and it's really important specific to capacitors. All right, so what I've done for capacitors, I've created this table, which is very important, and the capacitor content's been there for, well, 3 years, but I don't think industry has really paid attention yet. And so I'm bringing to your attention that you've got to manage these two additional boundaries related to abnormal arcing fault and arc flash that only apply to capacitors. And there's formulas included in Annex R of 70E that will be included in the draft Annex W in Z462 that are embedded in the power system software right now. But I don't think industry's asking for these calculations yet. And I'm going to temper in the comment that we have to be very careful if you ask for these calculations and understand the implications related to working on capacitors. So I think, again, this is electrical hazard class information that was new, was submitted and adopted into the 2021 edition of 70E. We did not get it adopted into the 2020 edition of Z462, but we will for the 2024. So again, I'll be sending out this boundary table so that we make sure we keep the boundaries and actually the effects of arc flash and the effects of shock separate now from capacitors to all other low and high voltage AC and DC electrical equipment, FYI. All right, so again, Article 110 general requirements. Again, some scope and structure changes, so, and some wording changes. So the policy statement that is included, meaning that the employer shall establish, document, and implement an electrically safe work condition policy that does both the following. What happened is some additional items were added. All right, so some additional information was added. Requires hazard elimination to be the first priority in the implementation of safety-related work practices. Complies with Article 110.2 electrically safe work condition. Informative notes, minor updates. So a lot of the things I'm indicating are minor updates that I'm going to cover off. But there was a bit of a rejig and a rework of the article content in Article 110 general requirements. All right, related to the scope and then the electrically safe work condition. All right, so subtle changes, and the beauty of 70E is the changes are highlighted. There's a syntax to what's changed, but the key thing is look for the highlighted text in the 70E content on NFPA link or in your hard copy, and you'll be able to easily identify in more detail other changes that I'm not even talking about today because I just don't have time. With respect to Article 110.2, establishing electrically safe work condition, right? Actually, this is, sorry, there's an error there. That should actually relate back to Article 110 with respect to the risk assessment procedure. No, actually, sorry, this is where Z462 and 70 have these subtle changes. So under Article 110.2, it does define normal operation of electrical equipment. And what was added is the employer needs to validate that the equipment is rated for the available fault current. That would be on the onus of the employer to do that, and that's added as a seventh item to have normal operating conditions of electrical equipment, which is not included under risk assessment in 70E, but in Z462, these 7 items are actually an element of the risk assessment procedure. So FYI, 70 doesn't present it that way, but in your electrical safety program, these 7 items should be considered as needing to be validated with respect to risk. All right, but the third item will have to be validated by the employer. There's no way that the qualified person can verify that. They can't do the calculation. They can check nameplate data, and in fact, the max available fault current in the U.S. Is to be labeled on the electrical equipment. So in that case, the qualified person could check it, but that won't be the case for all power distribution electrical equipment. All right, so FYI. Article 110, under job safety planning, it now adds a requirement that your energized electrical job safety planning form needs to include an emergency response plan documented by the qualified person and or the qualified person working with an electrical safety watch or a standby. So that's new. Right. Moving on very quickly. Again, like I said, there wasn't, in my opinion, a lot of changes. The changes I'm presenting, I'm basically downplaying them, that they're not significant. Even this one in Article 120.6, process for establishing and verifying electrically safe work condition, the words at the point of work need to be tested for absence of voltage. Well, I think that's what I've been communicating all along is if you're going to, make contact with conductors and circuit parts, make sure you test it for absence of voltage on them before you take the arc flash and shock PP off and again do de-energized repair and alteration. All right. As well, an informational note was added to clarify the UL 1436 standard, the outlet circuit testers, and other similar indicating devices as the standard for the AVTs. All right, so the point of contact, just a templated low voltage SLD, is my point of contact here, or is my point of contact down here, right? So we'll test for absence at the panel board, right? But I got to open up this isolation device, sure, but I'll test down here for absence of voltage at the point of work. So the point of contact, right? So some other changes, Article 130.5C, some informational updates to notes 1 through 6. As far as 130.5G, under incident energy analysis method, an informational note was added that you need to consider changes to your power system that could impact the incident energy calculation. So that should have already been considered, but again, making specific language changes to 70E put specific focus on it. So under your electrical safety program, you should have a management change process, and any changes that could impact your power system study, short circuit protection coordination, and incident energy should follow a formal MLC process that will be set off by some of the changes listed: utility changes, transformer changes, modifications to electrical protective device settings due to additions to your power system, right? For equipment labeling, it adds again clarity that the label should be of a sufficient durability to survive the environment. And I've found some paper labels installed. They don't survive, of course. So the medium that you use should be a vinyl that is, required to be survivable when attached to electrical equipment, indoor or outdoor. So moving on to Article 130, work involving electrical hazards. So this is where there was some, I'll call it, significant changes to be aware of related to the shock protection approach boundary distances. What was identified is that OSHA limits of approach have information that, again, are adopted into law versus IEEE 4 and IEEE 516, right, for these minimum markover distances. So both the related Annex C will be updated to reflect that the distances now will be aligned with OSHA 29 CFR 1910.269 Table R-3. And so we'll delete the IEEE reference standards in Annex C, and it's basically what you're going to see is it's adding a rounding error to the distances. So they're not changing substantially, right? The other thing too is a note's been added that if you're working at higher elevations, then you need to consider the impact on some of these distances. So on the screen, I've highlighted in yellow, you can see that it's really putting a second decimal point of accuracy on the distances for restricted approach, right? And a separate row was added, right? Again, breaking out a row from 751 to 15 kV, that's a new row. All right, so this is, my opinion, a significant change, but really it's just adding some, again, clarity to the distances with a 2 decimal point accuracy and based on OSHA requirements instead of IEEE. Article 130, again, work involving electrical hazards. So estimate of likelihood and severity, new informational note, just clarifying that closed doors do not provide protection. And all along, they never should have been considered. So if you're through door racking, power circuit breaker, the door was never considered to be protection, right? So you wore the arc flash PP based on the incident energy on the label, and the door was not considered, right, as part of any protection ever, right? So doors open, doors closed, doesn't matter. And I got the power circuit breaker racking in work tasks listed. So Article 130.7C1, personal other protective equipment, and 2021 new note added: when estimated incident energy is higher than the AT of commercially available arc flash BP for testing for absence of voltage, suggested risk reduction methods, 4 methods were listed. So that's the original language from 2021, and the new language just clarified use of a non-contact capacitive test instrument or other permanently installed metering device in the equipment for indication before using a contact type test instrument. So you're going to reduce risk by keeping distance and checking for absence with a capacitive test instrument, or looking at a meter that now shows 0 volts, and then go in and test for absence for low voltage with a contact test type equipment. And it does say indication of below 1000 was removed in this note. So again, if you weren't aware of this, this was added, and it gave you some direction, right, with respect to risk. If you have, let's say, an incident energy value of 76 calories and you only have a 40 cal suit, right, well, then these are other risk reduction methods that you could use before you go in and this relates again to testing for absence of voltage. Article 130, again, work involving electrical hazards, hearing protection. Just clarified that when you're within the arc flash boundary and about to do an energized electrical work task, minimum canal insert earplugs, right? Employees inside the arc flash boundary shall wear the hearing protection required, right? Because you're going to go in the boundary, get to the working distance, do the work task, right? That can cause an abnormal arc fault. Therefore, you need hearing protection. So again, just language clarity, but that always should have been the case. Just clarifying for foot protection in Article 130.7C8 that it needs to be electrically hazard rated in the US. In Canada, it would be ohm rated. 130.7C15 added an informational note that for both AC and DC systems, the arc flash PP category of the protective clothing and equipment is generally based on determination of the estimated exposure level. So one thing we did in the CSA Z462 standard, we validated the arc flash PP category table method, minimum arc rated PP ATPVs by redoing the calculations with the most conservative 1584 assumptions. And that is another deviation that we made in the 2021 edition. We added arc flash PP category 5 related to low voltage switchgear as a min 75 calorie. That was not adopted into 70E. All right, so behind the category method, and you'll hear some debates about this, well, it never did have any calculations completed. Well, it sort of really would have or should have lately, and we did redo that on the Z462 side, but I don't believe they did that on the 70E side. So one change that is significant is in Article 130, again, related to DC and electrical hazard classification. So I mentioned new information on capacitors. Well, new information on DC being submitted by industry through credible research, issuing of white papers, and presentation of the information. So what's happening is Table 130.C15B for DC electrical equipment is going to change the lower threshold from 125 volts DC to 150 volts DC to sustain an abnormal arcing fault. But you can see that it says 125 volts DC and less 17 kA. So there's, without this background information, right, you're not going to realize sort of what's transpired. So in 70E, if you look at it, it also changed the rows from 2 rows to a single row, right, greater than 150 volts and less than or equal to 600 volts DC. That table only applies to 600 volt DC. So for large solar farms, you can't use this table because you exceed the maximum voltage limit, but the lower threshold to sustain an abnormal arcing fault was changed to 150 volts DC. So within your company's electrical safety program and risk assessment procedure, you now need to reopen that up and say, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to leave it at 125 volt DC nominal and require minimum 8 calorie clothing? Or do we want to change that and move to 150 volts DC? And that if it's 125 volts DC, it's just site standard PPE. So again, getting this new information, some interpretation from me or others, but ultimately you as an employer need to decipher what you're going to do here. So this table, that's what happened. There was submissions that tests were done, and we originally thought we were, would and could sustain 125 volts DC, but no, we did more tests, right? And we now believe that we really, didn't sustain enough, and the measured data, the measured instant energy values that were measured also indicated that maybe we didn't have the right information or new information. So FYI, this is a new change, and it does quote the 3 different researchers that submitted this information. But electrical hazard classification, it's changing. I've got a note on here that OSHA still says that greater than or equal to 50 volts, consider an electric shock or abnormal arcing fault likelihood, but you have to come back to the reality of the actual research. But the research is changing, and here's an example of DC research changing. So again, Article 130.8, reclosing circuits after protective device operation, it just adds some additional language, which again, only a qualified person should be, reclosing circuits, but only after doing a root cause failure analysis. All right, so you should be doing root cause. You shouldn't sit there and continue to reclose, believing that the fault is going to clear, because it won't. There always should have been some root cause failure analysis before even attempting a single reset. And again, that's where the electrical safety program can indicate by policy, no resets, single reset after root cause failure analysis, and then after that, you're establishing electrical safe work condition and doing separate and independent root cause failure analysis after that. So that's it. That's sort of a highlight of the changes in chapter 1. And chapter 2, I just quote that be aware of the new 70B 2023 and 2023 edition, and it has changed fundamentally. And it's put focus on maintenance for safety. Chapter 3 and 70E, this is where I said the US DOE changes are the most significant, all the definitions moving out of the articles, and then make sure that the information now with respect to different electrical equipment that you're aware that it doesn't apply to standard AC and DC electrical equipment. You've got to be very careful here, specifically the capacitor, lung protection boundary, and the hearing protection boundary. Do not get those mixed up with AC and DC electrical equipment with your consultant, with anyone you're hiring for training. You have to own this as the employer. And I say that in concern, because you need to control the narrative related to electrical hazard classification, the interpretation of the information, and what you do as the employer based on your risk assessment procedure. There is tons of misinformation out there still on abnormal working faults and arc flash. And then now with this change of information and putting more focus, I think, or awareness on the chapter 3 electrical hazard classification information, I'm really concerned about the capacitor boundaries being pumped out for AC and DC electrical equipment, and they only apply to capacitors. So be careful. So back to this chart of the different classifications of electrical equipment and the DOE's research. Again, I can provide you a lot more background information if you email me offline. It's completely publicly available, non-copyright information from the DOE. But again, I'll have my summary table emailed out. As far as the annexes in 70, not a lot of change, right? So some publication, minor revisions, Annex C was updated to reflect, again, the OSHA, right, arc over distances instead of IEEE 4 and 516. And a new Annex S was added, sort of a summary related to 70B, assessing the condition of maintenance of electrical equipment. Ultimately, get a copy of 70B. You need the trifecta here. Safe installation, safe work practices, and maintenance for safety. All along, I've been promoting that for a decade. All right, so, and I will have a 70 2024 edition changes and updates document emailed out separately. Moving on to Z462, right? Very quickly, this is where it's critical that in the US you're aware, we are deleting the term arc flash PP category completely, which should have been done editions ago, because wrongly, over the last, well, since my involvement in this, workers say they're wearing HRC 2 or 4 or category 2 or 4. Well, that's not what they're wearing. They're wearing arc flash PP with an arc thermal performance value or break open threshold energy rating. So we decided that we're going to get rid of this term and get rid of any confusion. And whether you use method 1 or method 2 to determine arc flash PP and the arc flash boundary, the outcome will immediately be that the qualified person will understand that they need to confirm the ATPV of their arc flash PP, not have some interim conversion from category to a minimum arc rating. So we still have the tables, but because we've deleted arc flash PP category, we renamed the tables to arc flash PP selection table method, and they are arc flash PP selection tables for AC and DC. So again, the history here is unfortunate because engineers in the reports put a column in there and cross-reference category, 1, 2, 3, 4, or level letter, and they never should have included that. The software vendors made an error there that never should have been in the software as well, and that for the most part has been cleaned up. But there's still this overarching problem. I'm wearing Cat 2. Well, is it what's its ATV? Because Cat 2 is 8.0 to 24.9 calories per centimeter squared. So Z462, we're limiting that term. 70 did not adopt that change. This is significant technical divergence, as well as renaming the tables is a technical divergence. And we're relocating the tables in Z462 from clause 4.3 to an annex, Annex V. My concern there is annexes are interpreted as informative, but in Z462 Annex V is normative. So this may be miscommunicated by engineering consultants in Canada that the old arc flash PP category table method is no longer valid because it's in an annex, and that's misinformation. So I'm going to try and temper that next year with lots of communication for Canadian users of Z462 that there are two methods that are acceptable. We've renamed the table method to this arc flash PP selection table method and deleted the term category. And as I mentioned earlier, we already added this category 5. Well, instead of category 5, it's going to say for low voltage switchgear, min 75 calories per centimeter squared, ATPV arc flash PP required. I like this change, and it gets rid of this whole confusion. And then employers always should have had just 2 arc rated clothing level choices, or arc flash PP choices, 8 to 12, or an arc flash suit greater than 12, 40, 51, 75, 100, or 140 calories per centimeter squared. Oberon Company, the leader and innovator in arc flash PP, has always had those higher ATV arc flash suits, but again, misinformation about what I call the 40 cal myth, because 40 calories was miscommunicated as implying that arc blast pressure would be thousands of pounds per square foot, which was false. So if you haven't heard that yet, you're hearing it again. Well, you're hearing it from me that 40 cals is not a stop point, right, for energized electrical work. So we're deleting the category, we're renaming the tables. This is huge. And the confusion in Canada needs to be managed because these changes are not in 70E, and I don't sponsor that NFPA 70 ever does anything with the tables, and that they're never moved to an annex. All right, so moving on to some of the other changes. We've adopted the definitions, but instead of including the clause number, we're going to actually in the brackets say what it actually applies to. So that'll be a difference between CAN US on the definitions, moving from R clause 6 right into R clause 3 for Z462. So here's the old categories. We added that category 5. Well, this column will just be gone. It'll just say if you use the arc flash PP selection table method, select PP min 4, min 8, min 25, min 40, or min 75. All right, so we always had, these tables that referenced 2 arc rated clothing selection requirements. Well, what's going to change in Z462 is we'll have the one table that applies to both the arc flash PP selection table method or instant energy analysis. So it'll be also a renumbered table because our tables are going to be renumbered in Z462 because we relocated, unfortunately, the work task table from clauses to Annex F, which I also did not sponsor. Now that's anticipated to happen. All right, so we're changing the title, right, to what will be Table 2 in Z462, which was Table 130.5G in 70E. You are not changing the title in 70E because it only applies to instant energy analysis, but in Annex H, there was another table that said if you use the arc flash PP category table method, select 2 arc rated clothing levels of PPE. All right, so there's an image or pictures of 2 arc rated clothing levels. Again, what I call level 1, and that's commercially available 8 to 12 ATPV, and then an arc flash suit. And as indicated, you can get an arc flash suit up to 140 calories per centimeter squared ATV from Oberon Company, and it is applicable for use. Whether it's everyday task wear or an arc flash suit, the residual burn injury is the same, 50% probability of secondary burn injury. Lots of debate on this topic, but it's valid when you do a risk assessment. All right, FYI, innovation from Oberon 2. If you're not aware, this escape strap, this is huge. This is huge. It's patented. Only Oberon has it as an escape strap vest, right? Or in their arc flash suits. All right, so this is innovation in electrical safety again for emergency release of an electrically shocked worker, or if a worker is exposed to arc flash and you have a standby, as you can see, they can, after they call the alert, they can grab the escape strap and remove the worker to a safe area for first aid. So again, table 2, which is the work task table, I call it the work task table under arc flash risk assessment. I did not sponsor this move in Z462. I think it's a mistake. This work task table, which in NFPA 70E is table 130.5G, is huge in the arc flash risk assessment article or clause content because it immediately is provided to industry that for arc flash, here's 31 work tasks, and based on condition of electrical equipment maintenance, the likelihood of an abnormal arcing fault in arc flash occurring. In Z462, we're going to move it to Annex F, rename it, well, a new table number, F2, and then every table number in Z462 gets revved up, which causes confusion. Unfortunately, the loss of this table moving to an informative annex, it'll potentially not, industry in Canada won't be exposed to it, or new users. But if you're an existing user, then you'll understand the table is still valid. It always was valid, even when it is moved to an informative annex. All right, so table 2 again, 31 work task descriptions in Z462 moving to Annex F will most likely become Table F2 again in the draft CSA Z462 that will be published. So it forces, again, like I say, a renumbering of the tables in the core clauses of Z462. Moving it to an informative annex may say that it's not applicable, it's information only. I've always said to people, the annexes, it doesn't matter whether informative or not. It doesn't. If there's useful information, then use it, right? Use it in your electrical safety program, or use it to add clarity, which is the intent, to what's provided in articles or clauses as additional information. All right, so clause 401, again, in Z462, some minor changes that would align with 70E, but some of our own changes. Again, I mentioned earlier that in 70E, it calls it normal operating condition. In Z462, we call it normal equipment condition. We include the normal equipment condition as an element of the risk assessment procedure, right? Which I really recommend that you do that in your application of 70E, that now the 7 options in 70E are really things that need to be verified related to the employer's qualitative risk assessment, all right? Some of the changes we've made in Z462 that are not in 70E relate to clause 4.3, right, or Article 130 related to the energized electric work permit. So we've modified Part 2 requirements that you have an energized electrical job safety planning form. You don't need to repeat all of the information in Part 2 from an energized electrical job safety planning form. You just indicate that there's a separate job safety planning form that would be attached and included with the energized electrical work permit. The biggest divergence is we've added additional exemptions to the permit, which I've promoted for a decade. And in the electrical safety program I deploy with clients, I tell them, let's get all these different exemptions to the permit due to equipment design, so the permit is not bureaucracy. So what we're doing in Z462, we're now formally adding more exemptions to the permit. So you can see I've got some wording changes, right? We're adding in that for normal operation of electrical equipment, you never needed the permit, right? And then we're making sort of statements that you would then have to defer to define the work task, but performance of tasks that do not involve repairs, modification, or any alteration of the electrical equipment. Underneath that would be discrete work task descriptions. Performance of tasks involved in establishing electrical safe work condition, including verifying absence of voltage and the installation of temp protected grounds, does not need the permit, which makes total sense, but I've been promoting that for over a decade. Right, opening hinge doors for the purpose of inspection, provided restricted approach boundaries not crossed, don't need the permit. Separately, any requirement to open up a hinge door in your electrical safety program, just exempt it due to equipment design. We got to get to the other side to test for absence, right? Or to test for voltage, right? Or other diagnostics work. So that's a significant change. In Z462, some updates to our annexes, minor updates. Again, the biggest changes, I think, are, well, these are annexes not included in 70E, sorry. So these are annexes that you might want to look at in Z462 that just didn't get accepted into 70E. So we've got electrical switching isolation. We've got a detailed annex on temp protected grounding, right? We've got a detailed annex on arc, flash, and shock warning equipment labels that I authored probably 5 editions ago in an attempt to get compliant arc, flash, and shock labels installed, which is still a huge problem in industry globally, in my opinion, right? So these are annexes for 70 users. Get a copy of Z462. They're valuable. Some of the updates we're going to make in 2024 is we're going to actually add in that Annex S into our already pre-existing Annex B, where we had safety-related electrical maintenance equipment content. The table, unfortunately, Table 2, moving to Annex F and becoming Table F2. That's the work task table, which I don't like. Annex H, just we're updating the content now because we've deleted the term arc flash PP category. So any table or any information, any language related to arc flash PP category is wiped out in Z462. So in turn, we had to update table H1, which was the 2 arc rated clothing level table, if you use the arc flash PP selection table method now. All right, so we updated Part 2 on the sample permit in Annex J. We added some general category information that I don't think will be in 70E, and specifically electric shock sequela. That was content that I wrote. I knew about sequela. I had John Knoll come forward. If you're not aware of electric shock sequela as a USA attendee or international attendee of this webinar, get in touch with me. I've got a great article summarizing it. But we also have 2 hospitals in North America that have studied and researched electric shock sequela and sequelae for over a decade, believe it or not. In the US, University of Chicago SETRI program. Google it, you'll get some very detailed information. Annex V, as I mentioned, we've completely rewritten Annex V in Z462 and moved, unfortunately, Table 6A and 6B to Annex V, renamed them to Table V2 and V3, and Table 6E is gone because we no longer have a conversion from a category to an ARC rating. So Table 6E is wiped out. And then we added new Annex W to Z462, was working with capacitors, which was and is Annex R from the 2021 edition of 70 that we did not, unfortunately, add at that time. So that's a detailed annex on capacitors, where earlier the information that I talked about, it provides all the background information on the unique effects of a capacitor related to electric shock, abnormal arcing fault, arc flash, and in turn, the hearing protection boundary and the lung protection boundary. All right, so Table 2 moved to Annex F, renamed to Table F2. Do not like it. Canadian attendee, be aware of this. Doesn't impact in US. All right, so the other thing that we did get added to Z462, which was in 70E, is this flowchart assessing hazards associated with work on batteries. So that's a good addition to Z462. That was already in 70E. All right, so moving on to clause 437315. Well, this is the arc flash PP category method. Content moved to normative Annex V, renaming it to arc flash PP selection table method, deleting table 6A. Well, sorry, renaming table 6A and 6B, but deleting table 6C. This is going to confuse users in Canada. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of trainers out there that just don't have the background. They never will. And in Canada, I'm really concerned that this is going to be problem for those that are doing training that are really, in my opinion, not detailed subject matter experts and don't have the background and substantiation when changes like this occur. That's a Canada problem, not a US problem. So I'm going to try and temper that in Canada to the best of my ability. And again, I have a separate document for Z462 2024 anticipated draft. Again, changes which I'll email out to everyone. And some additional information, I think I'll probably email this out too, but this is a detailed arc flash and shock equipment level infographic. That's a compliant label to ANSI Z535, 70E, and Z462. There's unfortunately too many labels out there that are not compliant due to the history of arc blast pressure, 40 cal myth. And unfortunately, in the footer, what I find is that engineers do not include the protective device ID and indicate whether the incident energy is load or line side or bus. Huge problem. The qualified person needs clarity, and they need to know the upstream electrical protective device. So here's some compliant labels again, and I've increased the size of the incident energy and the voltage. It's so hard to read the labels. So let's get that font larger, and I'll gladly send you MS Word templates of all of these labels if you email me. The warning danger labels, some other labels as well. Maintenance mode switch on. I've been on client sites in the last 6 months where there's maintenance mode switches and arc flash relays, and it's not on the label. It's not indicated on the label. There was some awareness by the qualified person, some not. And then there was other issues with respect to the qualified person even knowing if these were programmed. So that all of these things we're doing that are positive to reduce risk, it comes down to the qualified person owning it at the field level and making sure that they can validate that the maintenance mode's programmed or the arc flash relay is programmed. This is the employer's obligation under your electrical safety program, and you need to train your workers on your electrical safety program and then train them on the specific information that's presented. And the lack of consistency in labels across your enterprise is another problem because you didn't control the label spec. So when you do replace your labels, that label media problem, it's hard to get off. So you might have to put a blank over another label that was put in the wrong location on the electrical equipment and then install your new label. As well, you can use results tables. So you would install this generic label on the right. So just FYI, some background information at the end of the webinar here as I bring it to a close and then open up the mic here shortly. So this is an extraction of an article from Lanny Floyd. And Lanny Floyd is one of the, I guess I don't know what to call him here, but he's a mentor for me. He's been someone that I've met back in 2006 when I first got immersed into this. He's been influencing my electrical safety consultancy, my passion for this. Lanny Floyd and several others, but Lanny has promoted electrical safety programs since the beginning of time. And again, he wrote this article, and as far as the hierarchy of risk controls, he quoted this graph from two other gentlemen, B. Lyons and G. Popov, with respect to breaking down substitution and engineering safety by design into substitution, minimizing, simplifying passive controls and active controls. So I sort of like breaking down engineering safety by design or prevention through design into different classifications. These are additional 8.5 by 11 notice signage that I encourage you to consider when you do have maintenance mode switches installed or arc flash relays, or you have specified and installed arc resistant electrical equipment. The qualified person from the capital project side doesn't necessarily receive effective training on the new equipment. They just get it, give it to them. There was no budget. They weren't trained. There's no technical training. This is new to them. So not only your employee, but your contractors, I'm finding the electricians do not know that there's maintenance modes installed. They're not programmed or the arc flash relay, and they're not aware that it's truly arc resistant electrical equipment. Sometimes it is, but it doesn't look like it. And again, if you know what I mean with respect to arc resistant electrical equipment, it looks tankish, right? It's beefed up, and that's why it's beefed up to retain any arc blast pressure and vent it out the top. So some additional labels. I also have a free scope of work and tech specification for arc flash hazard and incidental studies that I will be emailing out to everybody in this webinar. You can take it and make it your own. I do also have an electrical equipment asset classification, equipment labeling installation specification to allow the employer to better specify what equipment you want to label on, and the consultant could get a more firm bus count related to their cost estimate. I am trying to help employers get this right and take control of arc flash. So all of you will receive these documents. Gladly do what you would like with them. Again, I know that's fast, and I went through the information very quickly because I was trying to watch the clock, and I'm just before 10 o'clock. So I'm just going to bring things to closure with some concluding statements. These standards have always required interpretation. Now with the 2024 changes for 70, not that many changes, in my opinion, right? Giving you more of a focus on the electrical hazard classification changes and the impacts that those will make on your electrical safety program and the concerns related to training specific to capacitors and the two unique capacitor boundaries. All right, the good news is this version 70, not a lot of significant technical changes, not a lot of changes in general. 2024 Z462, different story. 80 changes, significant diversion from 70E, and users in Canada need to make sure they interpret these correctly. I'm telling you, and 70 users online for US or nationally, get a copy of Z462. We got some good information you don't have in 70E. Some information that you should not look at, as I highlighted today, but other information that can add value again to your resources, right? Your background substantiation for your electrical safety program. So employers need to audit their existing electrical safety programs and update them appropriately. Employers need to train their workers on their electrical safety programs. I'm finding this is a gap. You know, generic Z462 or 70 training, it's just training. It doesn't dictate the policies that will be implemented, right? The practices that will be implemented, the generic procedure requirements that are implemented. You do that through an electrical safety program. Over and over, I get involved with clients and they've done what everybody else has done. 3 bids and a buy on training, PP, and studies, and then nothing's happening. Nothing's happening because the employer did not implement an electrical safety program to get those 3 things implemented to ensure that they could substantiate residual risk is as low as reasonably practicable, right? Documentation, documentation, documentation. When it comes to safety, those are 3 words that are significant, but industry is lacking electrical safety programs, or if you have one, from my experience, when I review existing electrical safety programs, they're not compliant. So again, I want to acknowledge Grace Technologies as a leader in electrical safety device, development, manufacturing, and getting these things available to industry, right? The check bolts on the screen, that's been around in one form or another for I don't know how long, a long time, right? There's been some changes in evolution in this space, but Grace has been a leader since the beginning. And I want to give Grace, again, acknowledgement of their expert network that I'm participating with them. And again, you can check the website. But again, I'm available through Grace Technologies and their expert network to support you in your journey with respect to electrical safety program development, external electrical safety audit. All right, so thank you very much for attending. Nick, we'll open up for question. I think you had a quick poll and some other information you wanted to cover off. Again, Nick, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Yes, thanks, Terry. Excellent content, excellent presentation as usual. I'll run this poll. It'll run in the background. In the meantime, anyone still sticking around, you can submit your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now. If you're interested in the expert network, or if you're interested in permanent electrical safety devices, you can go ahead and enter that here. But Terry, if you'd like, you can, at the top of the screen here, you can click on chat. And then there you can see the questions. And if you scroll back up, if you scroll back up to about 1029, we had our first question, and then from there you can scroll down and just kind of see.
Yeah, no, again, 1029. You said 1029?
Yeah. Oh, your time would be, let's see.
Yeah, I got going into, so I'm just going to go down here. Let's see here. So yes, again, Nick will be emailing out a recording of this webinar, right, for everybody's perusal after the fact. All right, so that'll happen. Please change the caption language from Spanish. Got that. It says, whoa, how was the door never considered protection? It never was considered protection, actually. From the beginning, in my involvement of it, the door is never protection unless it's arc-resistant electrical equipment, because the pressure can build up and the door can release. I think it's highly unlikely in, the majority of any abnormal arcing faults for standard low and high voltage equipment where our short circuit current is less than 65 kA, that the door would either open at the hinge, the latch side. So the door was never considered as a barrier for arc flash from my involvement in this 16 years ago. All right. So never consider protection. Wouldn't that technically mean you'd need to wear PP walking in front of the panel if the depth of the panel was shallower than the safety? No. Well, this is the other problem. An abnormal arcing fault likelihood is no for normally operating electrical equipment. So we don't need arc flash PP or shock PP to walk in front of any enclosed electrical equipment, low or high voltage. You never did, right? You never did, because operating the electrical equipment, it doesn't have a likelihood of creating an abnormal arcing fault while you're standing in front of it, right? And again, that's another debatable issue, but it's true. It's always been true. Also, if the door doesn't count as protection, then couldn't you technically open the door prior to testing with non-contact and then waive the non-contact? That one's a loaded question a little bit. So yes, opening a hinge door energized is allowed, right? The problem was in 70E, the need for a permit just to do that, which I tell people, exempt the permit like a decade ago for opening hinge doors and even removing bolt-on covers. So basically, if the qualified person can put the equipment into an abnormal operating condition to do diagnostics or troubleshooting or test for absence, right? So at that point, when they open the door and they're about to go in with their probes, by the way, these are probe extenders from Fluke, if you weren't aware of these, that the worker can probe in further away, right? At that point, their work task description determines the abnormal arcing fault likelihood as yes, and then they open the door and go in. But you can open up a door on energized electrical equipment. This is where you're going to hear different opinions without any arc flash or shock PP, to just do an inspection on the other side, or then to use an IR camera. And the person using the IR camera doesn't need arc flash or shock PP. They stand outside restricted approach. All right. So yeah, Nick, I don't have a problem with the PDF or the PowerPoint being shared with everyone. That's perfectly fine. Normally capacitor and low voltage equipment is part of manufactured equipment. Who's responsible to label vendor equipment? Well, that comes up the odd time. We asked the vendor to do energy analysis. They can't, right? That pieces of electrical equipment, until it's connected to the power system, we do not have the maximum available short circuit current or arcing fault current of that piece of electrical equipment. So capacitor vendors will not put a label related to arc flash, right, or the hearing protection or lung protection boundary on the capacitor. It will have to be something that would be analyzed when the capacitor is then in the power system, right? I was just on a client site yesterday. They just did a power factor correction capacitor project. They're installing 25 kV capacitors, 4160 and 600, and I advised them the timing of this new information is relative. But again, the manufacturer of electrical equipment cannot label arc flash instant energy analysis data. You have to get an independent study completed and field-based labels installed. QR codes versus classic codes. I'm not sure the context of that one. If you have a PSD on front of the panel like Grace check volt, do you need PP to check the voltage? No. That's why you put it on the door. The door's not open. There's inherently no arc flash or shock hazard to check the voltage on the check volt mounted on the door. Cart makes ATV 12.2, but do not make shirts at ATV 12.2. The only option I see is one pullover shirt at 16 is ATV 12, the highest level I can use, the standard hard hat and face shield. So everyday task where you have to consider worker comfort. So shirt or pant, the shirt and pant will never be the same ATPVs, but if it's a coverall, it will be. So specify 8 to 12 coverall or shirt or pant, and then the pant will be a higher ATPV, the shirt will be less. Then you got the balaclava and the shield for what I call level 1, and the shield will have a different ATPV, the balaclava will, and the shirt. And typically, if the shirt will have the lowest ATPV, so that's the ATPV that the worker's protected to. Pants will be a higher ATPV because of the material for the pants. So again, you got to watch this on defining an everyday task wear arc flash PP ensemble, coverall, balaclava, and shield versus shirt and pants. So FYI, again, you'll never find a shirt that'll match the pants. Never. It'll always be a lower ATPV, right? And I don't recommend you go any higher than 12. The workers will complain about sweat in the summer. So that's why, again, historically, from my involvement 15 years ago, it was to get this 8 to 12, and that's it. And then obviously the balaclavas and shields were ATV ratings based on the manufacturer. All right. Let's see what else. Great information. Thank you, Terry. Thanks, Terry. Does the 70 revision define what work is? Example, switching a load rated switch gear, say 1247, does that require a hot work permit? You never needed a work permit to operate electrical equipment, ever, ever, right? You do not need an energized electric work permit. And this question systemic with what I see about the energized electric work permit in 70 and Z462. It's been misinterpreted. It says that you need the permit whenever a worker is exposed to arc flash and shock, unless it's exempted. It provided 4 exemptions. And then all along, I said, we need to clarify that you don't need the permit to operate open or close circuit breakers or disconnect switches. You never did, right? That's an operating function. Don't need a permit for that. All right. Thanks, Terry Grace. Can we have a copy of this? Yes, you can. Learning more about Expert Network. That's just Nick posting. You bet. Let's see. Does CSA have any guidance on PP requirements for 1500 volts DC with photovoltaic? Well, yeah, it does. But 70 and Z462 are never going to provide you direct information. They're going to say do an arc flash and shock risk assessment related to the work task being performed on the electrical equipment, right? So for photovoltaic farms, we can get up to 1500 volts DC at the combiner box. Well, okay, great. It's no problem. It's no problem until a work task is completed on the combiner box at 1500 volts DC. So this is this electrical hazard classification and electrical hazard identification that under your electrical safety program, take the work task table, which is now table 2 in Z462. Create your own version of it, right? Add shock column to it, and then keep that generically against what are we working on? What's the diagnostic or testing for absence going to be on? Well, it's going to be on 1500 volts DC. Whoa, 1500 volts DC, I can get a fatal shock and an abnormal arcing fault can be sustained. All right. So again, the guidance is I need to do an arc flash risk assessment for 1500 volts DC. The problem is that voltage, table 6B doesn't work. You got to get a calculation, right? And is the worker ever going to go into the combiner box or other components of, again, the power system from those combiner box to your converter energized at 1500 volts DC? So define the work tasks anticipated by the qualified person, and then do, an overarching qualitative risk assessment. That worker then would complete an arc flash and shock risk assessment, get their PPE. All right, carpets. I'm not sure about that for carpets, but I don't recommend rubber insulating mats are used at all, right? I'm not sure what the context of carpets, right? I've seen an arc flash event, relocate a door. Yeah, you're going to see possibly one event in on a blue moon that might have a high pressure, but I see this all the time. Well, geez, we don't want that, but it's unlikely that it's ever going to happen, right? So it's a risk assessment that you need to do as the employer. I've seen this video. I've heard this. Some person posted this person was, burned from an arc flash, but for how many pieces of energized electrical equipment we have globally and abnormal arc faults and arc flash occurring, it's negligible. But you as the employer analyze your equipment for the likelihood of an abnormal arc fault depending on the work task initiated and arc blast pressure. I said for 65K less, if you look at the information that's available on blast pressure, it's going to be hundreds of pounds per square foot, not thousands of pounds per square foot that have been previously communicated. All right. Again, any questions you want answered, you can submit separately, right, to Nick and or myself. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right. Covers and boundaries. That changes the cover is bolt on. No, well, the bolt on cover, so the bolt on cover, whether it's hinged or bolt on, you know, that's relative to that piece of electrical equipment, right? For arc flash and abnormal wrecking fault, whether it's bolt on or hinged, if the pressure is going to be extremely high, but it won't be, right? Unless it's arc resistant electrical equipment, we consider the door not there, right? We consider the door not there. Automotive industry. So again, that's where people ask, well, the scope does it include EVs? Well, it doesn't explicitly say EVs. And I tell people that the scope, you know, it's political, the scope historically. It just don't even take a look at the scope. It's political, right? So if you want to apply, you know, electrical hazard identification to any EVs or EV chargers, please do, right? Because that's what should happen. Because it's not about the EV vehicle, it's not about the EV charger, it's about the work task that the qualified person would perform on the piece of electrical equipment. It's always been about the worker role and the work tasks, then the equipment, then the maximum nominal voltage for shock hazard identification and clarifying abnormal wrecking faults can be sustained, right? How can we implement an internal hazard communication in an electrically intensive workplace like substation, for example, the operator knowing the CT? Again, I don't know, again, reading through some of these questions, the operator and the qualified person, I don't, in the context of this question, I'm not sure why they would need to know that detailed information. For electrical hazard identification, the specific electrical equipment information is part of the calculations, right? So I'm not sure that question, the context of it. Should the hazard communication be labeled or documented? Well, your electrical safety program includes a work task table, right? You do arc flash and shock hazard identification against the work task table, and then you do arc flash incident analysis studies and include labels on the electrical equipment where the worker may perform those work tasks. So many manufacturers are creating so many requirements to protect against arc flash and shock on panels when the feed is this potentially due to misinterpretation of the code regarding arc flash? Because they also typically require finger safe terminals to protect from shock. Yikes. So treat the hazards separately. So for shock, our hierarchy of risk controls could be including more finger safe guarding and insulation inside electrical equipment, because if it completely insulated, guard and finger safe, there's no shock hazard. But I go into that equipment, interact in a manner that could create an abnormal arcing fault, then there's an arc flash hazard. So I'm just trying to clarify that some of these questions on interpreting electrical hazard identification, I'm encouraging you to step back from it and look at defining the roles and responsibilities in your electrical safety program, the different qualified persons you have by trade training. Then take the work task table 130.5G or table 2, and then inventory that task table generically against the roles, and then determine the voltage nominal that the task will be performed at, so we know that it's a shock hazard and an abnormal wrecking fault can be sustained. So I'm trying to rejig the context of the question that was just asked around that direction, right? So it's not just on that equipment there's exposure. No, it's the work task, and then we perform it on that equipment at some maximum nominal voltage that's in the box for electrical hazard identification, and then doing our arc flash and shock risk assessments to get the boundaries and the shock and arc flash PP tools and equipment. If there's no arc flash hazard, you need PP under 600 volt finger safe hardware. Well, yes. So because the door's open, you're going in, there's no shock hazard, but your interaction with your meter, with wiring that your hand may move and the wire comes out, could still pose an abnormal wrecking fault likelihood of yes. So keep the two hazards different with respect to adding a whole bunch of insulation and getting rid of shock versus interaction-based task can create abnormal wrecking fault. Is high potential testing considered energized work? Well, using any test instrument, right, is energized work, but not using, high pots. For instance, there's a shock hazard there. You should be trained and instructed and follow procedure using that test instrument, but you don't need arc flash and shock PP to use it, right? So that's specialized test instruments. Get trained on that test instrument, get trained on how you're supposed to use it. You don't need arc flash and shock PP to be using these test instruments. Why are the new boundaries for capacitors? Because the research done by the DOE, right, which was Mark Scott is the name of the engineer at one of the labs down there. He said, I've come up with this information. He presented it publicly. He presented it with white papers. He defined these new 2 boundary distances, and then it was accepted and included in 70E and their specific formulas for these distances. I encourage you to read Annex R and 70E, but temper what you read, because for capacitors, shock is different, arc flash is different, and blast is different. And we got to keep arc blast pressure for capacitors separate from AC and DC electrical, because it's not pressure, it's a shock wave, the way a capacitor will fail. So read Annex R, get clarity related to what's provided for capacitors, and then temper how you use that electrical hazard classification information going forward. How can we implement internal hazard communication? I think I went through that one. Good information. As an installation, resistance, and AC withstanding tests. I'm not sure of that one again, but like I said, contact me offline. I'll answer questions as best I can. What is your perspective using permanently test ports and voltage indicators as a test for absence of voltage before starting work? They don't seem aligned with point of contact principle. So that whole thing that's evolved, and I'm not going to get into it on this webinar, but the whole thing with AVTs versus the permanently installed safety device and Grace's product versus under vendors, there's a lot of politics and a lot of things involved there. Your company needs to decide what you're going to do and stand behind that and in the context of your electrical safety program. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. ARC thermal performance value is in calories per centimeter squared. It always was. That's, again, the rating of the clothing. Technically, it's joules per centimeter squared, but this all came from the US, so it all came out as calories per centimeter squared. Be careful if you label with joules, because you need to divide by 4 to get the calories. Again, I'd like to talk about risk assessment a lot more. I'm trying to temper all the misinformation and some of it's disinformation that's out there on LinkedIn by folks selling into the arc flash economy and using tactics that I don't think are ethical, right? So I'm just going to leave it at that. And the last question says, previously interpretation of opening gear requiring arc flash and a permit. How can we get clarity on the real interpretation? Folks will ask, where's that exemption written? When it's specifically not, which was caused confusion to begin. 2-level runs to be counterproductive. If I have 13 cal, I'm not in level 2 PPE, which goes up to 40. That's again where the mix-up has occurred between hazardous categories to arc flash PP categories, because there were a range of ATPVs, right? So drop that whole thing. Just look at commercially available everyday task wear, coverall, shirt or pant, and get the ATPVs between 8 and 12, and then go to an arc flash suit. But I encourage you to buy arc flash suits with a higher ATPV, 75, 100, 140 cals, and control and get rid of the 40 cal myth. And yes, balance substitution and engineering safety by design and attempt to lower incident energy, but balance the cost and technical feasibility to do so with arc flash PPE, right? Because again, these arc flash suits, when you do a qualitative risk assessment, do reduce the potential severity of injury damage to health residually to 50% probably secondary burn injury. Any arc flash event experienced by a qualified person will be a traumatic event. Whether it's 4 calories or 100 calories, it will be, right? But we can protect them from the burn injury up to 140 cals if your company chooses to select and provide that arc flash suit. This will be part of your electrical safety program and your qualitative risk assessment completed. All right. What was, Oberon escape strap. Google it, you will find it. Oberon escape strap. This is an escape strap vest with a 10-foot Kevlar non-conductive strap that will yank away 1,000 pounds, right? And then you can extend this escape strap so it's available as an over vest, right? And then it's also available in their arc flash suits. So it's embedded in arc flash suit jackets now. This is patented. No other vendor will have this escape strap. This is innovation in electrical safety. This is what you can use for emergency release of an electric shock worker, or again, for higher low voltage with a standby. The standby could then grab this and remove the person to a safe area, then to apply first aid and CPR. All right. A few other vendors besides Carrot that sell PP clothing. So Bulwark's a good one. Pioneer's another good one. Search those two. Another one in Canada is NWG. All right. So Bulwark, NWG, and Pioneer for everyday taskwear. Unbelievable inventory between the 3 of them. Check out all their websites. So Nick, I think I'm going to bring it to a close, and I appreciate everybody attending today. I really do. Again, I'm trying to get this right. I'm trying to stimulate a conversation, not accept the status quo, never accept it, always learn, always get new information, but interpret that information through a defined qualitative risk assessment in your electrical safety program. So thank you everybody for attending. Nick?
Thank you, guys. Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Terry. Terry broke a record today. We've been doing webinars for about 6 years now, and we had nearly 800 registrants, and about 400 people showed up. So thank you, everyone, for showing up and asking your questions. And thank you so much, Terry, for putting on such an engaging presentation with so much rich information. And we will be sure to get this information into your hands and to everybody who was unable to make it. So take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks everybody for attending.
All right. Bye, Terry.